where I knew that would be very, very difficult to get the best out of that player if we didn't give him a new contract.
And while that's quite a medical sciencey performance type meeting, by the time we walk down the corridor to go to your office, we normally have to kind of translate that into the kind of football speak.
Well, I don't want to let that get in the way of my performance. I just want to focus on the football, and it's something I've decided I'm going to leave till the end of the season. You're like, okay, roughly Google Translate, he's leaving. Unless somebody pulls out of that deal and then he's coming back to you.
At the behest of the manager, whether people get the contracts that they want either, is it?
Are you saying blame the director of football?
No, I just said there's other reasons. Might not choose to be re-signed. Anyway, we'll come on to that another day.
But yeah, there's not many places you go to where you can have 15,000 fans there, 16,000 fans there at times, but the noise feel like you've got 40,000 fans there.
These things play out in public now. You see it at the big clubs. Like, there's so much leaking of information.
Welcome, football fans, to Breaking Lines, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the beautiful game like never before. I'm Gary Rowett, former player and manager, joined by the insightful Dave Carolan, a man with his finger on the pulse of football's beating heart. Together, Dave and I bring you unrivaled insight, context, and a few stories from the trenches. This is Breaking Lines, where the game is more than just a match.
Well, Gary, here we are, WhistleBlowers, episode 4, and we've had 3 good quality questions come in from some of our listeners, which we're going to dive straight into. So the first one is from Paul Donovan, and he asks a really pertinent question as we're getting to this time of the year. How do you keep players happy with short time left on their contracts? For example, they're running out 3 or 4 months to go, but also a situation where you might have, say, 4 or 5 players running out and you want to keep a couple of those. How do you deal with those situations?
Yeah, it's a great question because it's a really nuanced and tricky situation to be in. And of course, as the turn of the year comes, you can probably keep players relatively happy up until that point. I think once a transfer window shuts in January, and they realise they're still at the club till the end of the season, they want to know what's going to happen, don't they? And that's just normal. At the end of the day, look, they've got families, they've got, they've got needs of their own, and they've probably got, someone in the background saying, "What's going on in the summer? What are we doing? Like, are we still going to be here? Are we going to move? What are we going to do with the hat?" You know what I mean? So it's a really, really tricky situation to be in. I think I've always judged. I mean, there's 2 sides to this, I suppose, because we've had it the other way where we want to sign a player and the player doesn't commit. This is a really interesting bit, isn't it? Where often players want to have both options and they want it to be in their own favour. If they don't want to sign or they want to see what opportunities are there for them at the end of the season, then they'll just keep saying, I haven't made a decision yet. Yeah, I'll get back to my agent. We'll have a cut. So it works both ways and everyone understands that. But I think the biggest thing for me is always, you have to be honest, but probably in this situation, maybe not over honest, if you know what I mean. Let's think about the player that is not getting a contract at the end of the season, but still part of a team, because I think there's all different scenarios. And if that player sees someone else signing a contract who you desperately need to make sure is tied up, then of course your door's going to be knocked on. And there's going to be a question, well, clearly I'm not getting a contract. And sometimes it can be, look, at the moment you're probably not, but you're massively important. And, managers will ring me about you February, March time. They'll ask me what you like. I'll tell them what a great character you are. I'll tell them how hard you've worked, to perform to the maximum means that you still get opportunities within the team. It means you still get game time. So it means you're still attracted to other people. So in a way, it's trying to sell that kind of win-win scenario for the player, but whilst being honest and not leading them on. Because I've known managers before say, listen, no, you'll probably get a contract. You just got to keep going and all of that type of thing. And then at the end of the season, they don't give the player a contract. and maybe blame the club. And at that point, you think that just doesn't sit particularly well with me. So, and then there's the other scenario where occasionally, if you've got 4 or 5 players in the same boat, where maybe 2 you really want to sign, but it's not absolutely paramount to the team, and 4 you're not sure, then maybe there's an argument to have to keep all 6 and just say, look, we're going to wait till the end of the season. We're not going to renew any contracts yet. We need to speak to the owner. We're going to see where we finish. That's going to be important. And I suppose there's times where you can push that scenario down the line, but be fair to everyone, because like I said, it's that horrible scenario that me and you have both seen, where you could say to a player, let's have a conversation next week, and then someone else re-signs, and you just know that that's the talk of the dressing room then, isn't it?
Yeah, that is one of the most difficult things, isn't it? When you know there are parallel conversations going on with players who are potentially going to be re-signed as such, or have an extension to their contract, and the others who are just being either held at arm's length because the club's not sure which way it's going to go. They're obviously looking at potential alternatives for that player. And then the ones who are just definitely not getting anything. And sometimes those guys, they just don't want to stay anymore. They want to move to a different club. They want to go to a different city, different country, or whatever. I suppose for those guys, they're in some ways the least of the problems, aren't they? Because they kind of have come to terms with the fact that they're not going to be there. We've had one recently where a player was essentially looking at retirement, in which case they're already in their own head come to the end of their own contract. The other ones are so difficult, aren't they? And sometimes we pick up on those kind of changes in mood across players, as we know that obviously if contract negotiations are either taking place or not taking place and how they're going, you can start to feel the change in the kind of mood from player to player, can't we?
Yeah, I mean, if you think back, that's a good example. I remember when we were at Millwall, we had a player that, I wanted to sign, had been sort of asking, am I going to get a new contract, whatever. And I wanted to sign him. The reason I wanted to sign him because he was an important part of the squad. I knew he'd be really, really valuable. We were going really, really well, pushing for the top 6. Yeah, I knew that player probably wasn't a long-term solution for the club. But I also knew the flip side was that if we didn't sign him, then I felt we would lose. And to a certain degree, the player was partly to blame in that scenario, but I understood it, where I knew that would be very, very difficult to get the best out of that player if we didn't give him a new contract. The club felt as though that probably wasn't the best thing for the club. And I understood that. I didn't agree with it at the time, but I understood it. And so therefore, all of a sudden you almost have to sort of let that drag on 2 or 3 weeks, more or less tell the player the truth. And at that point, you can see the player just feeling slightly less motivated to do the right things all the time. And it does have a ripple effect. It does have a ripple effect on how that player feels, how the rest of the group see that situation. And it can be really, really detrimental with some of those scenarios. And I think, it's such a difficult balance that you have to get them right, because what you don't want is look, they're inevitable to have some problems in a football club around sort of January, February, March time. But the last thing you want to be dealing with in March, when you're in a brilliant position near the top of the league, is a player that's demotivated because he realises that maybe the club are just using him till the end of the season. I know he's contracted. I know they're getting paid. I get all of that. But players think a little bit more longer term, don't they, in terms of the commitment. So it was a difficult scenario, but it's a real live scenario that happens most seasons for clubs. And I don't think there is a right way of doing it. My right way of doing it was always to try and be as honest as I could. And if a player liked that, he liked it. If he didn't like it, he didn't like it. But 9 times out of 10, as we all know, a player 3 years down the line will say, I didn't like it at the time, but at least I appreciated you being honest with me. And I think sometimes as a sort of manager, that's about the best you can be, but it is a tricky one.
Yeah, we could do with some of these sentiments being said at the time rather than 3 years later where we're under pressure and we have to make these decisions. And quite often these things play out in public now. You see it at the big clubs. Like there's so much leaking of information around who's in negotiations and what offers are potentially going to get. That's a nightmare as well, isn't it? Because suddenly everybody around the building is kind of aware that things are happening. But you've also got to manage the guys who haven't had any contact from the club. There's been no phone call or no tap on the shoulder to say, come into the office, let's have a chat.
Well, there's some really interesting ones, isn't there, from a media standpoint, where if you've got a player that you're trying to sign and renegotiate with, the second that player comes out and says, well, I don't want to let that get in the way of my performance. I just want to focus on the football. And it's something I've decided I'm going to leave till the end of the season. You're like, okay, roughly Google Translate, he's leaving. Unless somebody pulls out of that deal and then he's coming back to you. But so there's so many different scenarios, isn't there? And it is so tricky because it works the other way where the club have to sort of navigate around it. Because, of course, a local press will say, well, what's happening with a 6 out? Everyone's after stories, aren't they? And often, you come to say that March international break where the local press are just finding anything they can talk about and they'll talk about the players out of contract. It is a tough one. It's part and parcel of football life. It's part and parcel of, maybe not doing these things a year early, because I think good planning in football clubs, usually you wouldn't let a player go into the last year of his contract. But of course, we're probably talking about a similar group of players, ones that you're not desperate to keep, but you're probably in an ideal world would either keep or let go, and you're not quite sure which way that's going to fall. And that's probably the scenario with a lot of these players, isn't it?
Absolutely. The nightmare situation is you've got loads of players towards the end of the season who have potentially are in a bit of limbo, but you're trying to maintain, performances. You're trying to maintain the team morale. But that sometimes these decisions aren't anymore in the hands of the manager. So, other powers that be are making decisions as well now, which mean that it's not always at the behest of the manager whether people get the contracts that they want either, is it?
Are you saying blame the director of football?
No, I just said there's other reasons. Might not choose to be re-signed anyway. We'll come on to that another day. Anyway, good answer to the first question, I thought, anyway, but maybe the viewers and listeners will let us know. Second question's come in from Gavin Blackwell. Gavin submitted a question previously, and he tends to come from a standpoint as an ex-physio around the kind of performance and medical side. And his question basically is, how important is experience and time on task of doing the actual job as a medic or a performance important within the realm of the interactions that we would have as performance medical practitioners and coaching staff? How important is that balance of knowing your trade and knowing the sport and knowing the craft of how we need to have those discussions?
Yeah, I think you need to kick this one off, then, don't you? And tell me from your perspective, as someone who's been in the industry a long time, how important do you think it is to have that understanding of the game? I suppose understanding of what the manager's been going through, which I suppose only experience can tell you that. How would you create that synergy? How would you do it, or how important do you think it is?
Yeah, I think I've used the kind of analogy before. It's almost like looking through two different ends of a telescope. So normally in the morning we'll have our medical meeting and we'll be discussing the fitness or otherwise of the players. Like some of it's quite basic in terms of we're discussing the rehab plans with certain players. But then we've got players who are essentially fit and available, but from time to time players have small niggles, little knocks. They've got concerns around this thing or something else, which may prevent them from either training at all or training partially or doing full training. And while that's quite a medical sciencey performance type meeting, by the time we walk down the corridor to go to your office, we normally have to kind of translate that into the kind of football speak and the kind of language that, not saying that you guys don't understand that language, but we almost want to put it into the kind of colloquial language of the coach's office, where we're talking about, you know, a modified training, and we've already thought about the type of drills and things like that that you might be doing on that day, and whether the player can be partially or wholly available for those, or they have to be withdrawn. And I think what we're trying to do there is essentially, if you've got that time on task and that experience of working in the building, you can have those conversations a lot easier, because you're not talking in medical speak or performance speak and very sciencey. You can talk to football staff at a football level and get across what you would like or what your expectations might be with the player, and talk in terms of I always look at it from the viewpoint of what would the coach be looking for as the information that I'm going to give them, rather than what do I expect the coach might understand from what I can tell them from the other end. So hopefully that's come across over the years, you know, in terms of our interactions. But what do you think, you know, when people walk into the office?
Yeah. I think the first debate I would have is, I think experiences often gets you to a place where you understand all those elements far more, because you've probably said the wrong thing in a meeting to a manager who's probably jumped down. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's probably jumped down your throat at some point, or you've had to navigate around it because maybe, you know, the manager hasn't listened as much to how you think maybe that physical load and that training needs to look for the week, whether that's an individual or a team. So I suppose, again, therefore, you have to think about how do I negotiate that meeting better, I suppose. And maybe that's experience. But I think that's the same in management. I also think there's times where someone really inexperienced, they'd have to be super talented, but someone really inexperienced, straight away, as a manager, you think, this guy's got it. You know, you can just sense that they've got an understanding. I think it's very difficult to do that from the outside. You know, and just come straight into a club. But I think it's possible. I think my challenges have always been the same as a manager. It's been, you know, let's say like someone in the performance role, leading the performance department like you would be, Dave. You know, does that person understand how you work and how you're going to see things? You know, we've had this debate so many times, haven't we, where, you know, a physio, let's say, will say, look, the player's available for, you know, he's probably available for 30 minutes. Do you know what I mean? And honestly, I mean, we've had it in meetings before, haven't we, where maybe someone's suggestion is maybe he could play the first 30 minutes, and you're thinking, so straight away you're saying, well, look, okay, I understand he's got to play 30 minutes, but that just wouldn't work on a football pitch. Do you know what I mean? It wouldn't work in a manager's mind, because that's not how you would do it. So look, I mean, that scenario, you know, you're talking about that scenario probably from someone very inexperienced, not an experienced person, or with low quality maybe. But there are scenarios like that where you, as a manager, you think, you know, they're just not getting where I would be thinking from. But I suppose there's also that argument of, I'm judging that from what I would understand, but actually there'd be times where, you know, like, for example, you would have said something to me, very unlikely, Dave, but there would have been opportunities, potentially perhaps, that I haven't told you about, where I might have been thinking, Dave, what are you talking about? That's not going to work. And then 10 minutes later, the player's pulled his hamstring that you've said, maybe we need to get him off because he's done so much high speed. Do you know what I mean? So I also think from a head coach perspective, that's my way of apologising in a roundabout way.
You heard it here first, folks.
But I think that's also that relationship between two people that you've understood and you've seen how that works, and you've seen the evidence, and you build that trust, don't you? And so often, you know, it can be maybe the physio, head of medical, or the head of performance that maybe doesn't understand what the manager wants and is not shaping it in the right way to get what they want or what they think is the right thing to do. But it can work both ways. And maybe the manager sometimes doesn't understand the performance side of it enough, and the medicals, which is why I think, ultimately you're trying to build synergy, aren't you? Where there's trust there, where you trust each expert and each head of department, and you run with it. Do you know what I mean? And whether it's right or wrong, over time, you obviously hope that more often than not you get it right. So it is a really difficult situation because, like I said, I've probably had very, very good people in those positions before, but maybe haven't understood what they've meant, or they've maybe put it across in a way that's actually got my back up straight away. And I've just kind of thought, I'm not sure about that. So I think it's like everything, isn't it? You have to build those relationships, don't you? You have to build that trust, and it works both ways. But I think experience helps. Absolutely. I think the fact that you've been in a job, is it because you're experienced? There's one for you. Is it because you're experienced, or is it just that you've been in a job so long because you're actually really good at your job? So therefore, for someone to be experienced, they have to be incredibly good at the job in the first place. Do you know what I mean? To get that far down the line in the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think there's two things there. One, some people stay at clubs because clubs don't want to move them on. They don't want to move on. So it doesn't matter whether they're good or bad. They just stay there. So they gain experience through default almost. So they end up with 20 years in the game, staying at the same club, never moved on because nobody's ever thinking of moving them on. And that certainly happens nowadays, where clubs are less likely to move on backroom staff because they've kind of gone for that kind of core module. I think in terms of how good people are, I mean, that's always for other people to decide whether they think you're good, talented, or otherwise. I think all you can do is always have that kind of ambition to be continually learning and developing and improving your practice and your knowledge. So that's important. And that means also spending time with those people that you work with to learn what's important to them in their work. So while I'm in the performance field, I need to understand the challenges for the medical side from both the physios and the doctors and the rehab side, but also from the coaching side. I think one of the best...
Sorry, I was going to say, just touching on what you just said then, I think that passion to want to be the best they can be for a manager or a head coach, I think for me, that is such a big thing to see. You could have someone with very low quality, and if they or perceived low quality, and if they desperately passionate and want to do the best, you will work with that person till you can't work with them anymore, because that for me is such a big thing. It's a lack of ambition is so difficult, I think, because you want to create an elite environment, don't you? And it's hard to create elite environment if people don't want to be elite. So sorry to interject, but I thought that was important.
No, it's hugely important. It actually comes on to the point I was going to make, which is one of the best kind of innovations. It's not really an innovation, but additions that we made over the years has been the Monday morning whole staff meeting, where everybody from the youngest member of staff within the departments to the most senior, we all come together in one space to discuss what's happening for the week. We discuss the injuries and the training. So everyone has a chance to listen and contribute if they want to. So they all learn in that environment as to what is the head coach or the manager thinking. They hear the heads of department interacting with you, and therefore they hopefully learn by assimilation. It's not that everyone always comes then with good questions or good insights, but at least there is an open forum there for them to listen and learn and contribute if that's how they want to do it. So I think that's a great way of developing staff, which is one of our keys has always been to try and develop the staff in the organization. But then there's a responsibility on them to want to develop and improve themselves. And that comes exactly back to what you said. If they don't have the passion for improving themselves, then should they really be in the building for any much longer, or should we be looking at better people?
Yeah,
that's I think that one in a nutshell.
Yeah, no,
which
you're right.
brings us nicely on to the last question, because going off the back of what would you improve at each club, Phil Clark, who's been a listener since the very start, I think, Phil has asked, at all the clubs that we've been at together, what would you have done differently at each club? And what did you learn from each one and put in place in the next one? So it's like a pretty big question, and we've only probably got about 10, 15 minutes. So let's see how we go. Shall we start at Birmingham?
Yeah. What do we do? What do we learn at each club? I think would probably be the easiest way of doing it. What were the positive things that we took? So Birmingham, I think we've spoke about this on numerous occasions, haven't we? Where it's very rare to find a club where you go in. Maybe it was a time that we went in. Maybe it was a situation where we went in. And I think you came in. Did you come in straight away, Dave, or did you come in?
No.
You came in a year into it, didn't you? Yeah.
I was about 6 months, 8 months later. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you'd have actually seen it in some ways at its best, because obviously it took us a little while to build that trust. But I think going in, I think it was, maybe it was because the club were in a difficult position, but it's very rare that you find staff that you create such a strong synergy with. I think that was probably one of the most unique experiences I've ever had. And we've obviously done that at different clubs, but I think overall, virtually every person at that club, we created a brilliant synergy with. And I felt there was such a unique togetherness there with the players and the staff, that I felt that was something that you had to value massively. If you think about it on I'll give a really good example. The Friday nights, and Saley was a big part of that. And obviously we'll have to get Saley on at some point to give a little bit more of a flavour of that. But we used to sit there Friday night, didn't we? And we've been at clubs where some will come down for a drink, some won't. Some come down and say hello, some don't. Some watch the match together or not. But we used to have every single member of staff, bar none, would come down at, say, 8:30, 9 o'clock, when all the medical team had done their work with the players. And we would sit and have at least one drink together, a game of cards, wouldn't we? It would be absolutely electric, the atmosphere between everyone, the banter flying around, and such a simple way of creating a real togetherness that obviously then transcended into the week's work, and maybe the week's work transcended into the culmination of a Friday night away. But it was such a unique situation, wasn't it? I mean, we that's probably been the main, or the one club where everyone's been part of that, hasn't it? What did you think coming into that?
Oh, it was such a unique experience of walking into what that environment was. First away game I think was somewhere like Leeds, and I'm seeing this all unfolding in front of me. The soft tissue guys, Egg and Seeley, taking over some of the games we used to play, because that was the thing. Like, we all enjoyed each other's company. We'd spend 3 or 4 hours together. And as almost nobody in some ways wanted to leave it, but eventually it had to come to an end in terms of the night.
Some didn't.
Some didn't leave it, yeah. But it was so good. Like, there was fun, there was laughter, there was we had done the hard work preparing for the game, and now we were relaxing and enjoying each other's company. So that was such a unique, yes, as you said, like staff and player environment, that it just all worked so well together, and really enjoyable times. And it was great when we went back recently to Birmingham to see that some of that still existed. Not all of it, because the people had changed and maybe the culture had changed. Maybe that was, everyone talks about culture nowadays, but that was certainly a great culture. And I think we saw the success of that on the pitch, didn't we?
And also, like you said, the quality of that work, I think the trust that everyone had in each other, the sort of the bond and the synergy everyone had together, created an environment where actually the quality of the work was absolutely brilliant, because everyone trusted each other, and it made it so easy, didn't it? And I think that's one of those. I think it was one of those moments where it'd be very hard to get that again, just for unique circumstances. But it's something that you always try to recreate. Recreate maybe is not the right word, but you try to build something as strong, which I think is becoming harder and harder, isn't it? Because of course sometimes you're not in charge of a lot of the staff movement within a club, but nevertheless, getting everyone thinking and feeling the same way and respecting each other in the same way was a really powerful thing. So yeah, that for me would be, and also the engagement of the players as well. But I think that all helped. I think it all helped with the staff, that togetherness. So yeah, I think that was a unique period in our career, certainly.
I think it helped when we find the players and put that money behind the bar on a Friday night. Only for one drink, by the way, dear listeners. But there we are. On to Derby. Derby straight after Blues.
Yeah, I suppose Derby was a very, very different scenario, wasn't it? Where we had, and this has not been derogatory to the Birmingham team, because there were some very, very good players in the Birmingham team. I mean, you think back to people like Damari Gray, that obviously had great quality. But going into Derby, it felt like you had to adjust a little bit because of the quality of the player, because of the money that had been spent, because of the level of player that had been there. And I felt, for me personally, it was a really interesting scenario of, you start at Burton and Birmingham and you probably use a very similar system to get the best out of the players, because both situations were both probably, the performances hadn't been very good at both of those clubs prior to us going in. Derby was a little bit different. Derby was kind of perpetually around the top six, and it was, could you get them up? So I think not only did you have to approach the players in a slightly different way, slightly nuanced way in terms of trying to get the best out of them and give them a bit more information, maybe, and a bit more responsibility. But also, that was the first time I felt, do I need to create a system or create a way of playing that maybe gets the best out of some of those players rather than the other way around? So certainly from my perspective as a manager, trying to get the best out of people like Matty Vidra, who had so much quality, as we saw, I think scored 24 goals that season and had, got the top goal scorer award in the championship. But, having to just adjust your methods a little bit probably opened my eyes to, what maybe was required at different clubs rather than doing the same thing, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's that difference between, transferring your kind of philosophy as opposed to transposing it or, transplanting it, taking the same thing and just making it do it. I think that's a perfect kind of description of it. We had to do things slightly differently, even in terms of our week, because we took what was a really successful kind of training philosophy at Birmingham, where we just knew it was like we'd have Thursdays off, wouldn't we? We'd use that model. And then we just realized with the Derby players that didn't really work. It didn't get the most out of them that we wanted. So we tweaked it. We realized that these are different players with different kind of circumstance. And you have to mold. The team molds you and you mold the team, don't they? So I think it was a great example in terms of the facility at, Moor Farm there as well. I mean, it was... You had everything you wanted there, didn't you? You had some pools, you had a big gym, the training pitches went on for miles and miles and miles. Fantastic place to do it. And I thought, certainly for us, the learning about adjusting some of the stuff that we do to fit the players that we kind of inherited was a great learning there that we took on to the next club, which was Stoke City. But bit of a different challenge for us there, wasn't it, at Stoke? Because essentially it wasn't really a hugely functioning team at the time, was it? Certainly the performances on getting relegated from the Premier League, probably it was the first time we were posed with more challenges and questions than we had probably the other two clubs combined, really.
Yeah, I think that, certainly from my perspective, the one thing I learned with Stoke, and obviously I've spoken about this at great length on lots of different sort of media outlets, but for me it was not trying to learn how to control your frustration and control your emotion. I think it was a very, very good lesson. And sometimes I can remember so many things thrown at you in a day, but it felt like you just could. It felt very difficult to ever concentrate on football. That's, I suppose, the easiest scenario. It felt so. Of all the places I've been, it probably needed people above me to take a lot of the things out of the way in some ways, and actually, because actually you were fighting a lot of different things, and I've said it before. Some of those challenges were me going in and being frustrated that things didn't go straight away how you wanted them to go. But it was a real learning curve as well, wasn't it? I mean, people have said to me before it was almost like the perfect storm of so many things being quite negative that all came together that made it so difficult. I suppose it's a very bad analogy, I would imagine, but like 10 years in the Premier League, I suppose in some ways was a similar challenge to a Man United with Ferguson leaving. It felt like it was really, really difficult to get it right straight away. And I think Stoke was the same. But again, another club with passionate fans that desperately wanted to get back into the Premier League and still in that same situation. So there was no easy fix, was there, unfortunately? But yeah, it's a real challenge, wasn't it? And can we move on quick?
Well, I probably, from my perspective, it was one of those. I've gone to many conferences over the years, and sometimes you see people present on stage, and you think, "Wow, the program that they've got going, and the system that they've got going. This must be the best place potentially in the world to be doing this type of practice." And I often come away thinking, is that actually what happens behind the scenes? Or is that just a sales pitch either for the person who's potentially trying to get themselves a move or whatever, in their own practice? And I suppose I'd seen stuff from Stoke in the years preceding that around injury records and availability. And I thought, wow, this must be some unbelievable system and program in place. And I probably learned not to judge things on face value from that experience, which was the training grounds certainly had been built, for a Premier League, for a Premier League team, but almost for a Premier League team with everything fully functioning and zero problems. The problem is when we got there, we had a training ground where not everything was operating as it should have or could have. And maybe the system there was actually more basic than we had at Derby, more basic than we had at Birmingham. So not only were you having to fight your fights with, getting the team together, recruitment, getting the team functioning and all the training stuff, but we're also trying to put in place behind the scenes what was a functioning S&C program, because the players said themselves they hadn't done it for such a long time. And, trying to put some of that stuff into what was a Premier League team a couple of months before was really surprising. So, yeah, certainly a big learning there on not judging a book by its cover, or certainly not believing the wrapper. Speaking of rappers, we're off down to Millwall now, and great 4 years that we had at Millwall overall, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. No, listen, I think that was a unique experience, a unique club. I think going in, I think we had some not challenges, but I think we wanted to just change the mindset a tiny bit, and that wasn't a criticism of anyone's mindset before, because there was a lot of winning that was done over a long period of time, particularly promotion from League One to the Championship. But it felt like the club were in the Championship wanting to survive a little bit. And so I think trying to change that mindset of people, we can achieve something at the top end of the table and not worry too much about the bottom end. And then that was a little bit of, I suppose, me trying to sort of drag people with us in terms of our mindset and create that different type of positivity. But I think the biggest thing there was, we had a way of wanting to play. We had a way of trying to move that style of play forward, but we had such a unique fan base. And I think that's the one big thing with Millwall, isn't it? You've got such an incredible fan base and a unique fan base that actually trying to play a way that gets them behind it as much, and actually trying to do a lot of things to create synergy with the fans was a big part of Millwall Football Club, whereas some of the other clubs, of course, they're hugely important. And I think similarly, Birmingham was in some ways quite similar, yet, a lot of that would be generated by the performance on the pitch, of the quality of the performance. This was almost generated by, the passion as well as the quality of the performance and the style of play. And I think actually sometimes the amount of times that I had to say to myself, maybe we've just got to be as good as we can be in a Millwall style, whatever that might be, that rather than always try, like every season was right, we need to play more, we need to have more possession, we need to have more control. But it was always very difficult to get the perfect storm there because it was all about atmosphere, mate, sometimes when I look at it, mate, maybe someone like a Neil that understands that and has played there. Do you know what I mean? That unique DNA. I think we sort of saw it from the outside and tried to bring in some of that. And I think there is a real interesting debate at Millwall, isn't there? But, do you be as good as you can be as Millwall, or do you try and move Millwall forward? And I'm not saying you can't do both, but certainly that was a debate, wasn't it? And a unique challenge. But yeah, there's not many places you go to where, you can have 15,000 fans there, 16,000 fans there at times, but the noise feel like you've got 40,000 fans there. And it was a great 4 years, wasn't it? And we couldn't take too much with us on that one because we haven't actually been, well, you have, but I haven't actually been back in for longer than 8 weeks. So maybe we'll have to do another one after the next one. I'm at the next club to see what I did bring with me.
Yeah, I think one of the key things probably from Millwall, and it wasn't until maybe the last few months that we were there, and a colleague from another club was talking about, the atmosphere at the Den and how intimidating it is, and the passion of the fans and the energy that the team can get, and how it can be so overbearing as a member of the opposition who come to the Den, was the fact that at Millwall, you play in front of that 24 times. And you have to actually have a certain amount of robustness as a player to do that. And as a member of staff to be able to harness that as well. And it's not easy for everyone to do that, is it? To know that the expectation from the sidelines, you got to match that. You got to step forward with that as much as you can. And certainly the noise you get from the Den when it's on song, they can out-sing other clubs that we've been to on our travels who've got far bigger attendances, but just far quieter crowds. They don't turn up with the same level of enthusiasm and passion and energy that you see from a Millwall crowd. So I think if there's one thing that you would bottle and take with us, probably to any club, is almost that passion that comes from the seats that surround the pitch, because that can be the 12th man. It can probably even be a 13th man, the way Millwall do it as well, can't they? They can drive you on to huge success.
Absolutely. And I think it's funny when you're there, I don't think the pressure feels the same as maybe an opposition manager or an opposition team, because you're, of course, trying to create that pressure, and you're trying to create that sort of style of play that becomes almost a little bit of animosity when the opposition kick off, and obviously I think the challenge was always, how can we create a balanced team that could keep getting better in different ways and finish, what did we finish? Sort of 8th, 11th, 9th and 8th, or was there a 7th in there or something? Yeah. So if you think it was 4 finishers, and the only year that we finished outside the top 10 was a COVID year with no fans. So I think that kind of gives us that understanding. And the first year, my belief is would have finished higher than 8th if it wasn't for that COVID break. But I suppose there was so much energy into how can we just keep pushing to get the next step? And it was always that balance between what do the fans want and what do we need to get there? And it was a unique experience, and definitely one that I'm sure we all would have took so many things with our next club. So yeah, let's see how we'll utilize that, Dave.
Yeah, a club like no other, as they say. But there we are. That's today's questions, guys. So we'll look forward to the next Whistleblowers, which shouldn't be too far away, probably one in December. So thanks for answering the questions, and catch you soon.
Cheers, Dave. Thanks.